We're live. Go ahead.
Do what?
So it's muted currently.
Okay.
So Jess is starting. We need to get her to start.
Okay, so just press this and...
So this is your mute button. When it's ready, it's muted. When it's muted, when it as it connected. I'm so sorry. I did not even remember that.
It's okay. That's all right. I just wanted...
This will be your mute button if you need it.
Okay, so I have to unmute me?
Correct. Who's starting? Jess or Jess?
She is, but do I have to turn it off every time?
You don't have to turn it off every time. You can.
Okay. Beautiful. All right. You ready? She's going to be copying a while because she's doing 15 more packets. Ready when you are.
Hello. Welcome to Clark County's ADU Learning Lab presentation. There's going to be a Q&A session following the presentation, so please write down any questions that you will have while you're listening to the presentation.
Go ahead.
My name's Jess, sorry.
My name's Lori, and we're permit techs. I'm sure that many of you have been out to the company or the county's website and read the ADU handouts. You may have picked up a copy today before we ran out. And you've read through, you might have some existing questions. Good news, you're in the right place. Today we'll not only answer those common questions, but give you resources to help answer questions after we wrap up today.
Okay, what is an ADU? An ADU is an accessory structure to the main residential structure, a second to a primary.
Right. The type of ADU will depend on your property's zone, and we'll show you later in the presentation how to find your property's zone. Secondary types of dwellings include ADUs, guest houses, and temporary hardship placements. Hey Jess, is there a difference between an ADU, a guest house, and a temporary placement?
Yep, and that's what we're going to share with you today.
Great. All right, so with ADUs and temporary hardships, you're allowed to have a full kitchen. But with guest houses, no stoves, no possibility of hooking up a stove. Impact fees for roads, parks, and schools are also assessed on every property, but we offer reduced impact fees for ADUs. Guest houses and temporary hardship placements pay 0 impact fees.
Okay, an ADU square footage is determined by the zone. Guest houses and hardship placements have no restrictions on their square footage, but hardships do have a 2-year renewal. You may be wondering, how do you find your property? Well, we're going to show you.
Finding your property and its zone can be done in just a few easy steps.
Here is the webpage for GIS. You would either put in your address or your parcel number and then hit the search button. And here's an example of a rural zone property. This is where you can find your zoning designation, the appropriate size of your lot, and your sewer and your water purveyors.
Okay. And here is an example of an urban zoned property. Again, you've got your zoning designation, your approximate lot size, sewer, and water providers. There's a lot of information you can find on GIS. And if you'd like to become more familiar with that, please revisit the December 2024 Learning Lab at this link, and it will walk you through all the things that you can do out there.
Right. Okay, and then before we continue, we're going to show you the definitions on ADUs one more time.
All right. Okay. Is everyone ready to proceed? Okay. One rural ADU is allowed per property and must comply with the appropriate fire, health, and safety codes.
Okay, and rural ADUs are attached to a primary residence by a common wall of the primary residence or by a breezeway.
Jess, what exactly is a breezeway, and are there any requirements for it?
A breezeway is a covered, open-sided structure attached to both the primary residence and the ADU. And no, there's no length restrictions on the breezeway. They just have to meet building requirements.
Great, thank you for that.
Okay, rural ADUs have restrictions on square footage and height. Every ADU requires a connection to utilities for water and sewer. These require an approval from each provider.
Rural ADUs may be eligible for a home-based business, but this requires approval from our land use department. If this is something that interests you, please reach out to them at the email address provided.
Okay, and what are impact fees? You are required to pay impact fees for roads, schools, and parks. Clark County is providing an incentive by assessing 25% of the standard impact fees for ADUs.
Great. We've also provided the link to where you can go out and see the ADU chart for the impact fees. We had a few. If you didn't get one, we're making copies. We'll try and bring some back up before you all leave today. So unlike rural ADUs, which must be attached to the primary dwelling, urban ADUs can either be attached to the primary dwelling or standalone completely detached. A manufactured home can also be considered as an ADU, as long as it was built after June 15, 1976, meets state guidelines, and has been placed with the appropriate permit.
Hey, Lori, I have an urban lot with a hardship on it already. Can I have an ADU with it?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
Urban ADUs have restrictions on square footage and height. An accessory dwelling shall not exceed 1,000 square feet. However, if your lot is at least 20,000 square feet, the maximum square footage for a single ADU placement may be up to 1,500 square feet. There's also the possibility for a second urban ADU to be placed on a property that is at least 20,000 square feet. The combined square footage of the two ADUs may not exceed 2,000 square feet.
And every ADU, again, requires a connection to utilities for sewer and water. This is required from each purveyor. The rural?
Yeah, we're on 15.
Okay, like a rural ADU, an urban ADU may be eligible for a home-based business, but requires land use approval. If this interests you, please reach out to the land use department.
And just like with rural ADUs, urban ADUs receive the incentive on impact fees for roads, schools, and parks by assessing 25% of the standard rate.
If the property listed in Clark County is in Clark County Heritage Registry, the property owner must apply for a certificate of appropriateness to be reviewed and approved by Clark County Historical Preservation Commission prior to applying for a building permit.
That's good to know that they should do that prior to the permit. Thanks, Jess.
Yep.
Please visit the Historic Preservation Society at the link provided.
And when you are ready to proceed and ready to apply for a permit, you will apply for an ADS permit for an ADU. This slide outlines Clark County's intake process.
Great. For July's Learning Lab, an overview of LMS and project docs will be presented. These are the two platforms that we use in the permitting system. We'll also be going over naming conventions during that learning lab. Please join us again live or watch the recorded presentation at your earliest convenience.
Okay, and at this time, we are going to open up the floor for questions and comments.
Can you repeat those numbers again for lot size that you just gave? I think it was like.
Sure, for urban?
Correct.
Sure.
Sorry, I'm asked to repeat the question for people on the call. So could you please repeat those numbers that you had for lot size?
Certainly. For an urban zoned property, your ADU typically cannot exceed 1,000 square feet. Okay. If your lot is at least 20,000 square feet, a single ADU placement may be up to 1,500 square feet. And there's always the possibility that we may be able to get 2 ADUs on there, and the combined square footage of the 2 placements is 2,000 square feet. Great question. Thank you.
Okay, I have a question. What I'm finding is I'm finding a lot of homes that have like 5, 6, 7,000 square feet. I understand that's big enough to put an ADU. However, the position of the house on the lot, in a lot of cases, leaves the front yard or the side yard the best place to put an ADU. Is that okay?
We would actually have to take a look at the specific property. And for that, we'll discuss, setting up a Q&A appointment. We'll go over that a little bit later. And that way you can come in and discuss the particulars of it and see what we can do.
Yes, but it could be possible, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, and is there an offset from the property line that's an absolute minimum every ADU must comply with?
Just, you don't feel
Well,
that?
besides regular zoning setbacks, if you put the ADU in front of the house, there is kind of a rule of how far it can be set back from the house in the front. There's an actual plane. That's why we would want to look at it to tell you before, you'd apply, because it has to meet a certain percentage of the front plane of the area of the front yard.
Okay, thank you. There. Go ahead.
Who do you want to take next?
Pick one.
Thank you so much.
Does the have to come in and look at our property thing, we have to do that first to determine what the side footage is to keep away from side property lines? Because you mentioned just the front.
No, for
Is there a
side-
general rule?
That would be per your zoning. Generally, it would be a 5-foot setback in urban, more of a 20-foot setback in a rural. No, more of it's in the front. So the layout in the front's a little bit different than if it was going to be set aside to your house or behind. Does that make sense?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so you would just still follow the zoning setbacks.
Okay. And on the Clark County information page, it states whether we're rural or urban?
Yes.
Certainly does.
Yep.
See if I can go back to
'Cause
that
was my
slide
next
for
question.
you.
How do you, because urban to me sounds in town, rural sounds
You are correct.
out of town.
Which doesn't make sense with it being attached.
And then, you're right, it doesn't make sense with the rural ones having to be attached.
So if you see this right here where it says like your urban growth area, so you're
Okay.
in an
Oh,
urban zone.
Okay.
Vancouver,
Mm-hmm.
okay. What, that doesn't tell me what, I know my specific property wouldn't be up there, but, so that right there, rural 5.
Yep.
Okay,
So this is telling you it's a rural
R5.
property. Yep.
Isn't there R5 residential 5
No, not
zoning?
R5.
Oh, okay.
So that is the zoning, R5.
The R is rural.
Anything that's an R zone is going to be rural, an ag.
Got it.
Or
Thank you.
an FR. That's all rural zoning. Your urban zonings are going to start off with the R1. So R16,
Got it.
R15, R17.
5 acres, 1 acres.
Yeah.
How is the, what are the laws for Ag 20?
I'm sorry, say that again?
The laws for ADUs for Ag
They would be
20?
the rural zone. The Ag
Just,
20.
okay, same rules, okay.
Yep, but you still have to provide by that zoning setback. So, for instance, like most rural properties, you're gonna have a 50-foot front setback.
Okay,
And then your side and your rears are gonna be
50?
20.
Oh, 20, sides and rears 20, okay. Well, yeah, our 20 shouldn't have, there should be a lot of space.
April?
Two things. You had talked about an attached ADU for rural doesn't make sense. And I wouldn't say that we disagree with you, but it is state law. And that is because in a rural zone, you could, and we have had it happen where people will subdivide their property and sell off that lot with the ADU. And an ADU is not a house, it's an accessory structure to a house. And so to prevent that, Washington State Code says you have to attach an ADU in the rural zones. But I did have a question.
Yes.
You talked about in the rural zones that that you have to go through the purveyor, but most rural zones are on septic. So how do you do that?
So you still have to get septic approval. So you would go to the health department and work with them to see if your system is big enough or if you need a new system.
Awesome, thank you.
What about well?
Same thing, same exact process. You'd go through the Clark County Health Department and get an approval. Okay.
Excuse me. I have a question on uploading the files. I'm not real certain about how to go about doing that because I know there's the file name conventions. I'm not as comfortable with how that works and how, like, when you are uploading the files, how does your project docs, how does it actually connect with the files that you're trying to upload? I'm not absolutely sure about that.
So there are a couple tools that you can use. We do have videos on project docs that you can watch, and it gives you instructions on how to do your naming conventions, how to upload documents to drawings and to the docs folder, or make a Q&A, and then one of us techs can work with you directly, either in person, on Teams, or on the phone. Preferably not the phone, just because you would probably need a visual.
Right.
But we always have that option available.
Okay, so I could opt to in person.
Yep.
If it gets to, okay.
Yep, absolutely.
Jess, how much is a Q&A appointment?
It's free. There's no cost. Who's next?
I don't think it worked. So my question, two questions. Where can we find resource information about the rural ADUs and urban ADUs and what the difference is between both of those online? And the permitting process or the application process that you guys put up there, the 1 through 10, where can we find that online to reference?
So online, under the community development website, if you go to the building tab on the left-hand side of that site, and the drop-down, there's forms,
Okay.
and that's where all of our forms and information is going to be available to the general public. We do have a lot of that stuff up here too today. I think she just, handed it to you.
That wasn't there when I got here. Thank you.
Yeah, we ran out. I'm letting her control the, hold on.
Hi, I know that Portland and Eugene have pre-approved plans for ADUs. Do you guys have that?
We do not.
Green.
Can urban ADUs have attached garages to them, or do they have to have like
Yes.
separate units?
Yeah, they can, and they're not counted against the square footage.
Good one.
Who's next? I know she had another question here. Go ahead and talk into your microphone.
Just a quick question on the, say if you had an ADU in the rural areas, and to her point, say if you split off and sold part of it, with it, then the ADU happened to be on it, Couldn't you go through a legal lot determination to make that a legal lot?
Possible, but you'd want to talk to land use.
Okay. You might have to make some adjustments and things. And then I had a second question.
Do you mean to separate the ADU?
Yeah,
into
say
its
if
own
that
lot?
you did an ADU and then later down the line you split it.
If you
Does
did
she-
that, then the ADU would become the main primary on
Yes.
that lot.
Yes, and then you'd have to go through a legal lot determination to make sure it's valid.
Yeah, well, yes and no. You would go through land use, and
Yeah.
once you did your BLA,
Yeah.
then yes, you would have to do a legal lot after that.
Okay.
If you wanted to do anything else to that property, but then you would have to change it to the primary.
Yes, for that new piece of property. Yeah.
Yep.
And then could I finish?
Yeah.
And does it work with guest houses? Rural, urban?
So
Are
what
we
do you mean
talking
by
ab-
guest houses?
What's that?
What do you mean by guest houses?
Do they have all the same rules as the ADU? What are their rules?
Nope, they have different rules. They don't have restrictions on square footage.
Okay,
They also don't have a stove or
Right.
a hookup to it, so very
Right.
minimal kitchen.
and that's only supposed to be not for permanent living situation,
That's
for
correct.
come and goes?
Yep. Yep. Except for like maybe family.
So
Family
family
could be
could
permanent.
live there permanently?
Yep.
But you would also be recording a covenant saying it was a guest house and it could not be split.
Yeah.
That your lot could not be split because you're not paying impact fees on it, on a guest house.
Okay.
So you have to record a covenant that runs with the property.
Yeah, so you would record a covenant that runs with the property, and that entails saying you would not split it off. You could not make that like a primary.
That's just
Kind of
with
like
the
the
guest
same
house?
thing, like you were talking about with the ADU. You couldn't do the same exact process to divide it up.
Right.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't require the wall to wall, right? The guest house could be separate?
A guest house does not have to be attached to the main.
Okay.
Yes, that's
Thank you.
correct. But a guest house is only allowed in certain zones. So you'd want to verify your zone can have a guest house, because not all zones can.
Okay. Do you want to go ahead and hit your mic?
Oh, sorry.
No, he's good.
I had a question in regards to an urban detached garage. If the garage is placed on the property line, can you build or convert that garage into an ADU or build on top of it?
Are you referring to it being the only structure on the property?
No, like you have a house and then you have a detached garage on the
Okay.
property, and then converting that garage,
You could.
even
Yeah.
if it's on the property line?
No. So it would still have to meet setbacks. So if that structure isn't, even if it's on the property line. So what do you mean by that?
So like you have an existing garage and you would build on top of the existing garage?
You can, but what did you mean by on the property line?
Just a lot of properties sometimes are either 5 feet or 0 feet from the property lines, and just
Okay.
converting that garage, some
Okay.
people want
So
to.
you could convert the garage into an ADU, yes, as long as it was previously permitted.
Gotcha. Okay. Gotcha. And then the firewall requirements, we would just have to fireproof the walls. Gotcha.
Yep.
So if you have like an existing 1,500 square foot house, you buy a property with a 1,500 square foot house, depending on what zoning is, call it rural zoning, call it Act 20. And then, so you can do a provision where that becomes the ADU, and then you build, is it a 50% requirement that you need to build 50% bigger than that for then the existing house to become an ADU? And
That's a
is-
good question.
That is a good question. We might need to research that.
Does it have to be over 50%?
Oh, well, like Ridgefield, other jurisdictions have a 50%. I'm
Really?
not sure if that's, I didn't see that in your details. So, but I think you're saying up to 1,600, so let's just say the existing house
1,500, yeah.
could be 50 years old.
Okay.
1,500, it's under your 1,600 square foot. So then I can go build a regular house there, call it 3,000 square feet for argument's sake. And then the main house that was there when I bought it, assuming upgrade of septic, for bedrooms.
Right.
That was an existing 3-bedroom, we're gonna build a 3 or 4. I upgrade the septic for 6 or 7. So assuming that upgrade is adequate, then we could build a new house.
Yes, you could. I just don't think there's any restrictions on the size of the new home. It's just the restrictions on the ADU itself.
And so then I'm getting, conversely, well, I'll wait, it's a several part question, is, then is that attached, do I have to attach it to that? Because what you're saying here.
Yes.
If you're in rural.
If it's rural, yes.
Yeah.
It would have to be, so the new home would have to be attached to the old home, even though we're making this an ADU. And then you're building the new home attached to it. So you would apply for 2 separate permits. You would apply for this one to change it to an ADU, and you would apply for your new home construction. And you'd show it attached either by a common wall or by a breezeway.
Okay, how long is a breezeway?
There's no restrictions on length. Just has to meet building requirements.
I'm trying to understand the logic then.
Okay.
If you have these, not attached, so I have this in your premises that we don't want you dividing, building an ADU, and then dividing it and having an ADU on the property.
Right.
But why don't we just restrict, there's all kinds of restrictions in Clark County, or there was in Vancouver, on ADUs. You were gonna have to, sign a waiver that you wouldn't rent it, different things. But why don't, if you build an ADU until the zoning changes or there's adequate infrastructure in place, you can't divide it, and that becomes a deed restriction. So what's the logic of,
It's a state requirement. It's not a county requirement.
Okay.
It's what the state kind of handed to everybody.
and does the county agree with that? Because that seems
I
counter.
don't know if it's,
We would be out of compliance with the GMA if we allowed ADUs detached in rural centers and have been told that by the state. So the state does not allow it. They say that it creates density where density is not planned, and so that it has to be attached. And we allow the hardship and the guest house in the rural zones too, so that's what they're worried about. You get a hardship, you get a detached ADU, and you get a guest house all on these rural lots because they can fit them, and then you've just upped your density that they're not planned for. But they also say that they don't want the splitting to happen. You splitting your lot, like, because you could split your lot through the assessor's office, and that can happen tax-wise. They can separate the lot by taxes, but it doesn't make a legal lot. But if people do that, then they sell it, and then the person that has the new lot now doesn't have a legal lot. How do I just, okay.
Seems like fraud. So
Right,
that it's addressed
right.
by a whole different system.
So let's say R5, you have a 5-acre lot. You put a house on it and then you put an ADU. You could go to the assessor's office and you could split those into 2 tax lots, but that would defy zoning. So you could split those and technically sell it because Washington's a buyer beware state. And then that person comes in for their new roof of that ADU that you just sold them. And we are like, sorry, that's not permitted. And you don't have a legal lot. So now you're in a situation.
And I don't want to sidetrack this, but it seems like the county building department and the assessor's office should be more on the same page with regard to this legislation and what they let people do. And it's not necessarily our fault or our responsibility that these loopholes exist for incongruent development. But getting back to, so can someone build an ADU with the now on a property that's an empty lot with the idea of building a main unit later?
no. So you could build them together, but you have to have the primary house first.
And what if I build the ADU and it's within the building permit, and right now I want to build 1,500 square feet, and I call that the main residence. And that is the main residence until later on I come and say, this is going to be the ADU, and I want to build a main residence within code, within upgrade of septic, within those boundaries. It doesn't seem that that's not permitted here. Am I correct?
Right. Yes, because no matter what, you got to put the primary residence first.
Well, and I'm calling the ADU.
The primary at first.
It's 1,500 square feet, it's well within your bounds of that, and I'm saying, this is my primary residence, but I come back to you in 5 or 10 years, assuming no law changes or, I can build another residence, and then the first one I built becomes the ADU.
Yeah, you would just you would apply for two permits, like was speaking about earlier. So you'd apply one for the main residence, and then at the same time, you'd apply for the used to be main residence that you're turning into an ADU.
And as long as I-
just to transfer basically that it's an ADU.
And as long as I follow those rules, connect it with the breezeway.
Yep.
You got it.
Okay.
You can do
Thank
it.
you.
Yep.
Thank you.
We have a question up here. Go ahead and use your mic.
I have a question about the GIS system.
Sure.
If you were a septic system, would the sewer say septic or would it say something
Do
different?
you have that?
I can pull that up, sure.
Let's take a look at it. One of them.
Here we go.
Yeah, so it would say rural resource, just like this.
Okay, that's what septic means?
Yep.
Okay.
Pretty much, yep.
Okay. Another question I have is, if you do have the ADU, does it have a different address than your primary?
That's a really good question. So it will, you will either have a letter attended with the main address if you guys share the same access, same driveway. Okay, so it'll just be a letter B is generally what we use. If it has a different access driveway off the property, then you're probably going to get a new building number, and it'll be pretty close to the house address. Maybe 2 or 4 digits off, yeah?
I'm so sorry. Well, one thing we didn't hit on is if you are, especially if you're urban growth boundary, if you are 300 feet from a sewer line and you have your house is on septic, if you build an ADU, you have to pull that sewer line all the way through your property to your furthest property line so that your neighbor will then have to connect, and that's how we get sewer to move throughout the county.
Yeah.
So just know that if you are on a lot that's urban and you're 300 feet away from a sewer hookup, you have to pull it, and that's an expense. You have to pull it to the furthest end of your lot.
Where's the measuring point from?
300 feet from where it last is to the structure. There is something called a sewer waiver. Those will not be given to you for financial hardships. Those will only be given to you if you have a lake or a mountain in the way.
Right.
I had a question. Can a duplex have 2 attached ADUs?
They can each have one attached to them.
Gotcha. So you'd be one building in the duplex and then one ADU per. Okay.
Yep.
Can you repeat that again? What do you ask?
So a duplex,
Oh,
can they have it attached? They could have one attached at the end. That's it.
so, in rural, you cannot have a guest house, or depending on.
It depends on your zone. So,
Ag 20.
yeah, I'd have to look it up to verify, but I believe guest house.
Now, you mentioned the growth management state thing,
Uh-huh.
so is that a state growth, no, that's different than the urban growth boundary?
Mm-hmm.
So the GM Growth Management Act, is it A? GMA? GMU?
DMA.
That covers the whole state, that the state says
Yes.
different zoning rules are.
Yes. Yep.
Hi, I kind of have a follow-up on that. So looking at my property, it's zoned R1-6, so that's rural, is
No,
that?
That's
Oh,
urban.
that's urban. Oh, okay, perfect, thank you.
1 second, April.
Ag zones, guest house requires CUP, conditional use permit.
Yes, thank you.
There's an added expense.
Is it again?
Ag zones, so any ag zones require a CUP to have a guest house.
The FR zones do too.
And the forest zones, FR.
Separate permit to get a guest house.
It's through land use.
You'd have to get it approved, so they'd have to approve the conditional use permit in order for us to permit the guest house.
Yeah, so I checked on this, or I was looking at this in 2023, and I noticed the rules for ADUs was pretty harsh. I understand there were some changes from Seattle or something in the state that
Yeah, we had
loosened
some
things
changes
up.
last year.
Okay, it seemed to me it was like 25 feet for a detached ADU before, and your thing says 24 feet. So is it if attached, it can be 35 feet? I mean, what's the
Are you talking about the
stipulations?
height requirement?
Yes.
Okay, so for urban, it's 24 feet. That was actually just changed from 18 and it went up to 24.
Okay, so if
for-
it's attached,
Yeah, for attached, if you're in the rural zone, it's 35 feet, because that's for
yeah, I saw
zoning.
that.
Yeah.
But
yes.
not unless if you're in the urban, it's still 24 feet.
That's
then,
correct.
Even if it's attached, okay. All right, and then so the attaching items you mentioned a breezeway, has anybody done anything different? Has there
I've
been
seen some long
decorative
ones.
walls or, I mean,
I've
something,
seen-
you know,
Yeah, I had one that was 50 feet. That's the longest one I've seen so far.
for a breezeway?
Yep, for a
Yeah.
breezeway.
Are there any other ways to attach other than a breezeway?
Nope.
Okay.
Just by, or common wall. So it'd have to share a common wall
Okay.
or a breezeway. Those are the only two options.
So are there any ways around that? Because let's say your roof is entirely covered with solar panels and you aren't doing a breezeway where it would look nice attached to the roof, then what do you do?
Yeah, it has to be by breezeway or
Oh.
common wall. Yep.
Maria?
Okay.
Okay, two things.
Okay.
Just for my own clarification. My understanding is that if you're in an HOA, your HOA cannot tell you, no, you can't have an ADU. Is that correct?
Well, we can't tell you that the HOA can't tell you. So we can only tell you the zoning and the regulations here. We do not do any recommendations on CC&Rs with your HOA.
Okay, second thing is, I'm in the process of buying a house and it's categorized as R9. What does that mean? And is there some kind of legend to,
R9, I believe you're in the city of Vancouver. So that's their zoning code in the city.
so that would be urban?
I would hope so if it's in the city, but it would be with the city of Vancouver. So you would actually apply for it in Clark County.
Hey, Jess, do we have time for a couple more?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm liking all these questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a definition of a breezeway somewhere within your code?
I don't know.
I mean, is that up for interpretation, or, I mean, is it just a 2x6 the entire way and call it?
Mark, do we have an interpretation in the code?
Covered pathway.
Covered pathway, open-sided.
No minimum width, height?
Putting a company called Breezeway.
I know, right?
I mean, I think we're all here because we have some kind of special, unique situation.
Yeah, I know, that one's a rough
I mean,
one.
I think a lot of people have
It's
the
been
same
great.
question. You know, what's a breezeway?
Yeah, so basically, it has to meet building requirements. Just think of it that way. So as long as you're meeting the code as far as like a patio cover, because
Yeah.
it's kind of the same thing, right? It's just thinner than most, and it's a walkable path, open-sided.
Submitted for review.
Yeah.
So the other question is, when did this or when does this go into effect?
Oh, it's already in effect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that leads me to my next question. I've got a project going on right now.
Okay.
We built SFR. We live in it right now. Building our house. We're 2 months away from being finished.
Okay.
I signed a conveyance saying we'll turn the structure into a guest house. No stove, no sink sizes. If I convert it to an ADU and put the breezeway in, I've already applied for the permit and paid the fees. Can I use that money towards
Yes.
the ADU?
Yeah. Yeah, we can go ahead and transfer that permit you're going to be able to use for an ADU from a guest house.
Okay.
There's just things that we have to go in and change. The fees may change a little bit, of course. Well,
Yep.
a lot, because you're going to have impact fees.
Yeah, that's what my next
Have you
question is.
submitted it yet? Or?
Yeah. I
So you just paid the
I
original
had to
fee?
get my building permit for the house.
Okay.
So yeah, the impact fees, that's a one-time fee,
Yes.
not annual. Okay,
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
One time. Yep.
that's it.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take 2 minutes.
So for, let's say an R10, R110, that would be considered urban?
R110, yes.
It would be, okay.
Yes, would
What's
be
the thing that
urban.
differentiates it? I noticed the one you set up at 1 point, or at 7.5, or it had no single-family dwelling, but the other one did. So, I mean, what differentiates when it says R1 to R20?
So the R1 zones is how you determine that it's urban.
Right.
So if you have an R and a 1, it's pretty much an urban lot.
Okay.
The only zoning, the difference between them is the setbacks, of course, is because of the size of the lots.
Okay.
The only one that really has different setbacks now, since May of last year when the code changed, is R120. So they have greater setbacks. But
Okay.
the R1, the R15, R16, R17.5,
And the R10?
all has pretty much the same. 10 front, 18 for garage, 5 on the sides, 10 in the rear.
Okay, okay. And I noticed that was a change from 23. I
Yes,
did notice that,
yes.
which was good.
The R110 went down. So they used to have a 20-foot setback in the rear and 10 on the sides, but they brought those setbacks down.
Okay.
One more.
All right.
Want to get the one more?
Okay.
My question is, for the rural zoned properties, does the ADU have to have some sort of an attachment, breezeway or something to the property, or can it be detached?
No, in the rural, it has to be attached. Has to be attached by breezeway or by a common wall.
Perfect. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
All right. I think that was it.
Oh, no, they had
okay.
another one. Go ahead.
So, what do you guys know about the growth management or the urban growth boundaries? You know, this year I think isn't this year they're changing and going to be rezoning? Do you know if they're going to be rezoning any of the Ag 20s?
You would have to talk to land use or community planning, really. Because they're the ones who really engage in that, is community planning.
Can I request one of these classes for that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we
Classes?
can put in something.
Right now, only community development does learning labs, but we can request that community planning does one about the comprehensive plan update. I will say until the comprehensive plan update is done, they probably don't have time because it's extensive. And yes, they're in the middle of it right now. And I think it's due December 2025.
So if I wanted to go in and see what changes to my area,
You won't know until after they finish it
they
in.
don't take requests and things like that?
They already took requests, site-specific requests, which are tough. They've already taken them, and they're not taking any more until after the plan has been finished,
So we'll
which
just have
is
to see what the boundary-
which is December of 2025.
Do you have a question?
Are there any specific parking requirements for city limits?
A good question. So you do have to provide on your plot plan parking for your ADU, yes. So you would have to have a designated spot available. Yep. Yep. It's okay.
How does the county look at this as far as assessed value on the property? Is it any more than a guest house having an ADU?
I don't, no, I don't think so. I think
That's the assessor's
Yeah, I
call.
think it'd be a really good question for the assessor's office.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't really do anything with the value of your.
Okay.
What's, say you put in an ADU or guest house, what are, for future reasons, the rules with development, on, if say if you just, use it as rental?
Well, with a guest house, with not having that stove,
You're right.
right?
Can you still use it as a rental?
I don't think so, but we don't regulate that here in community development. In ADU, you have a full-blown second home, so.
So I know with hardships, it's supposed to be family member.
Hardships, yeah, you have to qualify, so you have to,
Yes.
and that's why it's a hardship, it's for medical or financial reasons for a family member.
And that's the only one that is,
Restricted in that way? Pretty much, yeah.
All right.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you for all the great questions. Thank you for coming. Thank you. We presented a lot of information information today and know that you probably have a lot more questions in the future. And when these questions come up, or if you found a property you want to know a little bit more about, please reach out to our general line.
All righty. The Permit Center staffs the general line to answer your calls and emails between 8 a.m. and 3 p.m. Monday through Friday. If you call and get our voicemail, we're working with other community members. Please leave a message with your name, phone number or email address, the property you're interested in, and your questions.
Okay, and then the Permit Center is available on Tuesdays and Thursdays for Q&As. We have in-person, Microsoft Teams, and on the phone appointments with a tech, 30 minutes. This is a great resource to use where you can actually pick that permit tech's brain over what you want to do with your project. So please, please, please use it.
Great. And with that, we would like to thank you for attending today's presentation on ADUs. We look forward to working with you in the future.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for attending today's session. Thank you to our presenters. Our next session is presented by our Deputy Fire Marshals, Jason Noble and Jaron Wong. The topic is on the Commercial Fire Safety Inspection Program. That'll be that'll be in May, on May 15th at 11 a.m., and we hope to see you there.
Thank you.